All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're live. So, welcome back to each and every one of you. It is, of course, Thursday, the 11th, and it is 12 o'clock. So, I am very, very happy to join all of you here. And I'm very grateful for all of you who decided to join me on this exploration of what is happening in our world today. So, just to sort of give a little bit, well, before we get into it, let me just say, James, how you doing, sir? Malice, how you doing? Ivan, how you doing? The Good Shepherd, how you doing? And James, I have seen your message this morning, but I've been sort of very busy throughout the whole morning, so I have not had time yet to respond, but I have seen it. And yes, I am quite careful to click links that people send, whether that be on WhatsApp or whether that be on Discord, because you never know if someone's account gets hacked or whatever. So yeah, I will check it all out. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, I am very, very happy. Jaguar, how you doing, sir? I'm very happy to be joined by all of you. And I think right now, the reason for this stream, and I want to be very clear right from the get-go, today's stream is probably going to be uncomfortable for some people. Even people who might largely agree with everything I have to say might find it uncomfortable. And there's good reason for it. But I do think that globally, the time for uncomfortable conversations has arrived. I think here in South Africa, we're a little bit more, and maybe we have some people from the international audience here. In South Africa, I think we're a lot more equipped to be dealing with uncomfortable conversations because we've been having one for pretty much all of our history. If you go back, we've been having uncomfortable conversations with the British for hundreds of years. We fought 3 wars against the British in very uncomfortable conversations. We've had uncomfortable conversations around race, around culture, around the correct way to set up a society. And then for the last 32 years, we've been having an incredibly uncomfortable conversation with communists and terrorists who have this idea of how the world should be set up that is just, in my opinion, antithetical to human existence. And that, I think, in some way places South Africans, very specifically, in a very good what the rest of the world will become. It is super important that you understand this. None of your countries are headed towards some utopian melting pot. None of your societies are heading towards this incredible Rainbow Nation dream. The Rainbow Nation is a dream that exists only outside of South Africa, and it only exists in the minds of very left-wing, very progressive people who are willing to overlook all manner of violence and destruction in order to see it. You have to squint really, really hard and then not look at South Africa at all, and then you can see the Rainbow Nation. Otherwise, it does not exist. The Rainbow Nation is effectively a speech that was done in 1994, and then it was done. And that was also the end of it. So, super important that you understand this. None of your societies is heading towards that either. If we look at what's happening currently in Europe, a man is nearly beheaded in Belfast. What follows is righteous and I would say vindicated anger over what has happened, because this is not an isolated event, and it's important that you understand this didn't happen in isolation. The people of Belfast isn't angry because one guy was nearly beheaded. They're angry because for years now they have asked the government to stop importing millions upon millions of refugees that don't belong there. And it's almost wrong to call these people refugees because most of them, of course, aren't refugees. Most of them are migrants that are coming there with one goal in mind: the conquest of Western society for Islam. End of discussion. They're soldiers in the army of Allah, and everything they do is for Allah. So trying to behead a man in the middle of the street, that is the most Islamic thing you can get. That is how it works. That is what Islam calls for. So this man wasn't acting sort of outside the bounds of normalcy. This guy wasn't acting just on his own. This guy was acting exactly as Muhammad would have instructed him to act. So fundamentally, this is something that people have been asking. Stop doing this. And no one wants to listen. No one wants to pay attention. And so this is just one more straw. Now, is it the final straw? Is it the straw that breaks the camel's back? Probably not. Not yet. Because we have to start asking a different question. How much more of this will people take? Now, what's interesting was the response to this. Immediately as people started acting in righteous anger towards this and taking the law into their own hands and saying, look, we don't want these people here, get them out, the immediate response from the vast majority of leftists is to no longer focus on the man that was nearly beheaded in the streets of Belfast by a man who does not belong in the UK, who has no claim to existence in the UK whatsoever. In fact, this guy has even less of a claim because he actually exploited loopholes in the refugee program in order to get in. He would not even have gotten in under the incredibly liberal and sort of open call to refugee status in the UK. So this man wasn't there. He shouldn't have been there in the first place. Then he commits an act that most people in the West would look at with absolute disdain as a result of where our societies are today. And as people are breaking out, the people are not blaming the refugee or immigrant that nearly beheaded a man in the streets. No. And by the way, I wish I could show you guys the videos, but YouTube wouldn't allow the show of that video, at least not for a channel of my size. I'm sure bigger channels can get away with it because they have managers at YouTube that will sort of get the video through. I can't show that video because it will immediately get flagged and my stream will be taken down. But fundamentally, who gets blamed? The protesters, the people who are rising up and saying, look, enough of this. And then you have all of these people sort of claiming, Ireland is already such an unsafe place because 1 in 4 women will suffer domestic abuse. By the way, I don't believe that statistic for one moment, because as we have seen with almost everything the left does, it sort of, all of their accusations have wheels. It just keeps going. They just keep inventing new things to complain about, and they keep stretching the definition of things to the point where almost anything, if a man just looks at his wife and goes, what the hell did you do? Oh, you're a domestic abuser. So I don't believe that 1 in 4 women suffer domestic abuse in Ireland. I don't think it's anywhere near that bad. But nevertheless, that's what they claim. And to that, I would just like to say, right off the bat, if your own people are acting that way, that is your problem to deal with. If people from other countries are trying to behead your people in the streets, that's not your problem to deal with. Right? One could now make the argument Ireland has enough of its own problems with its own people. It doesn't need to import problems from other parts of the world. Let those people go kill and behead themselves in their own countries, and let Ireland deal with the scourge of domestic abuse that is happening in the homes of Ireland. This is the sad bit of it, right? When your own people do something that is unacceptable, you as a society have to deal with that. That's just the lot that you have in life. You have to figure out laws. That's why we have them. But that does not mean that somehow excuses bad practices from people who don't belong to your country in the first place. Or you get people like this. Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party in the UK, who goes on this, I won't let you guys listen to it, but basically does what Cyril Ramaphosa is doing as well, what the ANC is doing as well here in South Africa. When Cyril Ramaphosa on Sunday spoke about the illegal immigrants, the millions of illegal immigrants that live in South Africa, he goes, only the government has the right to deal with it. Citizens do not have the right to take the law into their own hands. To that, I want to say one thing very clearly. When the citizens realize that the biggest obstacle to society and civility and order is the politicians, the citizens have the right to take the law into their own hands, as has been proven throughout history. When kings and queens acted like absolute morons and were the biggest threat to their societies, those kings and queens were beheaded by the people. The people did not wait for the government to solve its own problems. The people will at some point have the right to rise up and say, look, we have asked nicely. We have asked you for 32 years, secure the border, stop millions of people coming into our country illegally. We don't want this. And with every successive government and all of the promises made, the government continues to bring in millions of people. At some point, the people say, well, hold on, you guys aren't listening. You guys aren't doing what we have demanded. And so now we will deal with the problem. At that point, you don't have, as a leader, the moral authority or the authority in the first place to tell the people that they're not allowed to do this. If you're not going to enforce the law, guess what? The people will. That's just how it works. That's a fundamental truth. But now, how did we get here? That's the big question that I want to start today's conversation with. And for the purposes of this, I'm going to talk about groups in a very general term, right? And I'm going to put it as weak men and strong men. And I'm going to do that because of the sort of famous saying now, bad times create good men. Good men create good times. Good times create weak men. Weak men create bad times. That is the fun. That's the only reason I'm using good men and weak men in this scenario. And I'm also not speaking about left and right because it will allow for confusion. Because people might say, well, hold on, Stefan, you're saying this is a left-wing problem, but when the conservatives, who are a right-wing party, got into power, they just made the problem worse. This is why I'm not using left and right, because you have to understand that our entire political system has been populated by weak men and women who have no moral authority whatsoever, who have no moral principle whatsoever, because of human nature. And that's where I want to start. In the left, or on the left, if you will, there is a prevailing thought. Let's just say on the progressive side of humanity. Society itself has been progressively getting worse over the decades. If you go back to just 100 years ago, the people who lived 100 years ago would look at what our politicians and people are doing today, and they would be appalled. They would be appalled at what is happening. And the reason they would be appalled is because we have forsaken every single principle of morality, every single principle of civility. Now, when you listen to the weak men, there is a reason why this has been happening. One of the things that I'll admit to all of you right now is that for about 15 years before I became a Christian, I was an anarchist. And I do mean I was a pure, hard-headed anarchist. I believe that the only reason you're seeing murder, the only reason you're seeing greed, the only reason you're seeing crime and all the bad ills of society is because of government. The government is tyrannical, the government is evil, and that leaves people frustrated, and so people act out against the government. My foundational teaching came from the left. It came from the people who I learned under at school, the people who I learned under at university, and that was that all people everywhere are mostly good, and you'll hear this often when you speak to people. They'll tell you most people just want to live. Most people just want to raise their families. Most people just want to be happy. You hear this often about from the supporters of Palestine, where they'll say the people of Palestine just want to live. They just want to raise their kids. They just want safety. The truth, however, is completely not that. Right? When the Palestinians have been offered a two-state solution, they have rejected it every single time. When the Palestinians were given Gaza and told you can do whatever you want there, what did Hamas do? They did not create a prospering society. They spent all of the billions of dollars that the world gave them to build a tunnel network so that they could destroy Israel. So the idea that most people just want to live and let live and most people just want to be happy, that is betrayed by the reality of our world. And for that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take you guys in a bit of a history lesson. And I do apologize. Most of my streams, I try to not do that anymore because it can feel like you're sitting in a classroom somewhere. And I am not a teacher of history. I just enjoy history in general. But I am going to take you on a bit of a history tour against this argument that most people just want to be good. Most people just want a good life. Let's go back to the most ancient of civilizations that we know of. And that would be the ancient Mesopotamian civilization, the Sumer or the Sumerian civilization. That's the oldest one we know of. There's evidence that some may have formed earlier, or there may have been older ones. The problem is that nothing of what they did survived. We have maybe tools of those civilizations, but nothing else survives, right? So clearly, even if that was a society of note, that society had not invented any sort of form of communication yet, insofar as leaving things for those that come after. So they weren't writing anything down. They weren't making any sort of cave painting that gives us an idea of what their society was like. If you look at the cave paintings of the Bushmen, some of them dating back very, very far, you'll find things like men hunting deer, right? So you get a sense of what that society may have been like, but you don't know what their government style was. You don't know what their belief systems were, what kind of gods they worshipped, because these are not things that they ever really recorded in their cave paintings or in their scribblings on cave walls. And so we don't know what those societies were like. The oldest we know of is the Sumerian society. Now, a lot of that comes from, first, the Bible itself, the historical record of the Bible, and how those people operated. But we do actually have some of their own writings and cave paintings and tablet writings that we can draw from. And this is one of the ways in which anthropologists have been able to figure out that a lot of the biblical record is accurate, because they see it in the Bible and then they find these writings from these tribes that descend from the Sumerian Empire, and they see that these things sort of connect, right? There's a similarity there. So what does the ancient Sumerian civilization look like? So first, in the ancient Sumerian civilization, the leaders are gods, right? The leaders, their origin story is one of the gods in heaven having a massive fight. Some of the gods die. The gods that die become the earth and the moon and so on and so forth. And then the gods create the rulers. Now, in ancient times, being a god simply meant that you are above the law. You are the law. If you are a god, you're not subjected to the law, because gods did not subject themselves to laws. Gods made the laws. And so you are a god in your own right. Another thing we know of ancient Sumerian civilization is that they most likely practiced sexual slavery to a very large degree, and this is found in a lot of the temples that would stem from tribes that follow in their footsteps, where you would have things like female temple prostitution, male temple prostitution, and it's not the prostitution that you and I might be thinking of when we think of prostitutes. In this regard, it would actually be people who are forced to spend their days in the temple and have sex with other people over and over again, until death. Sometimes a virgin would be effectively raped by hundreds of men and then sacrificed to the gods as a way of appeasing some of their gods. So this is ordinary, average practice in ancient Sumer. Another thing is children clearly have no real value in those societies, because we know from the hill tribes in ancient Judea, we know that they, or the Amalekian hill tribes, we know that they sacrificed thousands of children every single year on what can only be described as one of the most gruesome deaths a child could ever suffer. These children were thrown, so they had these altars that was to Moloch, That was the god that they sacrificed kids to. And how these altars worked is it would be a metal slab like this, and then underneath the metal slab, they would make fire. And they would continuously feed this fire until the metal slab itself would start to shimmer. In other words, the metal itself is starting to melt under this heat. These babies would then be thrown onto the altar to sacrifice to Moloch alive. So they would literally be cooked alive on these altars. We have sort of ancient texts that say the priests would be banging drums in the streets to drown out the sounds of these babies as they were being grilled alive to these gods. We know that there was a lot of blood sacrifice that was happening in these ancient times, and the blood sacrifices weren't just animals; it was most often humans. They would also partake in drinking blood because they believed in the ancient times that life is in the blood, and so if you drank someone's blood, you would actually be filled with life. So I would argue, if you actually look at how the ancient Sumerian society is set up. Now, remember, this is all through the lens of most people just want to be good and most people just want to live. The first civilization we know of is not a civilization that you or I would want to be a part of at all. You don't want to live in a society where your child can be taken from you and offered to a god and you have no say in it. You don't want to live in a society where your daughter can be taken as a temple sacrifice to be raped by hundreds of men and then killed on the altar to some god. You don't want to live in a society where you could become the next sacrifice and now you're taken and there's nothing you can do about it. You don't want to live in a society where your lord, the ruler of your society, is a god and as such can do whatever they want. They can make the rules as they please. They can take advantage of those rules because they're not under those rules. And effectively, you have nothing that you can say because you're not a god. In fact, the ancient Sumerians did not believe that they were descended of the gods. People, ordinary people, were slaves to the gods. And the ruler was the god, therefore all people were the ruler's slave. The Israelites are the first to break this trend. And if you look, a lot in Genesis is actually in answer to the practices of the Sumerians, where God outlaws the drinking of blood, says that this is unacceptable and it's not allowed. He outlaws temple prostitution and actually kills in one night about 28,000 Israelites as a result of temple prostitution, because this is what the Israelites immediately started taking on. God, in fact, judges the entire hilltop tribes of Amalek after 400 years of warning them to stop sacrificing children, and he slaughters every last one of them by the hands of the Israelites. So the Israelites come in, and for the first time ever, you see this society that doesn't preach that the rulers are from God and that everyone else is subject to the rulers. Instead, it says everyone is equal and everyone is made in the image of God, and therefore everyone must submit under the same law and rule of God. And so the Israelites are the first society that you would ever want to live under, because they're not sacrificing people to God. They're not sacrificing, virgins by the hundreds or sometimes the thousands. They understand that bad stuff isn't just automatically because God is displeased with them, but bad stuff is a natural part of life, but that God wants relationship with them. Right, so these things happen. Now we skip forward a little bit, because after that, you'll have a number of empires. The Babylonian Empire, they would do very much what the Sumerians do. You have the ancient Syrian Empire. They would very much do what the Sumerians do. And then we go to the first empire that follows that, the first big one, and that would be the Roman Empire. The Greek Empire, we can talk about that, but the Greek Empire very much just lays the foundation for what the Roman Empire would ultimately become. And so the Roman Empire and the Greek Empire doesn't differ all that much. But we see in the Roman Empire as well, and this is a book, there's a book called Dominion by Tom Holland, the historian, not the actor. And in Dominion, Tom Holland actually starts off, when he writes Dominion, loving Roman Empire, right? In fact, he tells the story, he used to, when reading the Bible, he would side with people like Pontius Pilate against Jesus because the Romans were powerful. Jesus was this weak, meek little man. So he would find himself consistently siding with the power of the Roman Empire. And it wasn't until he actually started looking at the Roman Empire that he realized, wait, these people were barbarians. Like, these people were really bad people. So, for example, the Romans, what do the Caesars do? They declare themselves gods above the law. The Romans practice temple prostitution. The Romans practice human sacrifice. The Romans are actually famous for throwing their unwanted babies out on the street to die of exposure. This is actually one of the acts that one of the very first churches in Rome undergoes. The widows and the women of that church every single morning would walk the streets of Rome and rescue the babies that are thrown out on the street. And then these babies would be given to single parents, so mothers who don't yet have babies or who don't yet have children, families that can't have children, or widows would then be given these children to raise because the families in Rome just neglected them. In fact, now when we're doing digs in ancient Rome, we find houses with thousands of baby corpses under the house, meaning these Romans were not playing around. They would just kill their children because abortion wasn't really a sure win yet. So they would just let the child be born and then throw the baby out. Right? So this is the kind of society they have. In fact, one of the ancient Caesars, as plague is ravaging the Roman Empire, this Caesar writes that he is ashamed of the Roman people because as the plague hits the Roman cities, the Romans would just leave. They would just pack up and go. They would leave their own citizens to die of this illness. The people who were staying behind were the Christians. Now, you have to remember, at this point, the Roman Empire is slaughtering Christians by the thousands everywhere they can find them. And yet these Christians are staying behind and tending to the sick, oftentimes at great losses to themselves, but they're doing this. And the Roman Empire remarks, are we really worse than these Christians? Right? So clearly, Roman Empire, not an empire you want to live in. Not by a long shot. You would want to live in the Christian one because they're not sacrificing people. They're not turning you into a temple prostitute. They're not killing people for no reason whatsoever. They have rule of law because the Bible tells them what they can and cannot do. Whereas the Romans, it's sort of anyone goes. So clearly, humans don't just want to live and let live. Humans have some very bad designs if you allow them to exercise those bad designs. Or we can go to the Viking Empire. All right. Not much is known about the Vikings because they famously wrote nothing down. But we do have some, and it comes from writings that happened right at the end of the Viking Age. So all we know about the Vikings comes from the end of the Viking Age, as well as some of the writings of people who encountered the Vikings. Nevertheless, we do know that you wouldn't want to live in Viking society. Viking society was also famous for human sacrifice, famous for temple prostitution, famous for sexual slavery, famous for inventing very, very cruel ways of killing people. And so the Viking society also not really a society that you want to live in. Again, you compare that to the Christian societies of England, of Europe, much better societies to live in. Because yes, they have kings, and yes, the king is ordained by God, but the king is not God. The king is also subject to the same rule of God as all of the other people are. And so you do see a measure of freedom within Christian societies that don't show up in other societies all throughout history. Now, why am I telling you all of this? Why is that history important? Well, it comes to the modern day lie that all people just want to live and be happy. This is something that even people like Kemi Badenoch will tell you. This is something that Keir Starmer will say relentlessly. Remember, what is the biggest sort of lie that is consistently told by these people, and one that is now less told because they have started to realize that this didn't really work. They told us for decades the reason these migrants are so violent is because of our inability to accept them. Because we are intolerant, they act violently. But if only we would be tolerant, they would stop acting violently. Now, I would argue that there are no societies on earth more tolerant than Western society. You look at the stuff that Western society has accepted, stuff that is vile to the nth degree, and yet we've accepted it. We tolerate it. And yet the migrants don't stop killing. The people from the third world clearly is not motivated by our intolerance. Something else motivates them. It's important to understand, what is it that motivates these people. A rudimentary reading of history will immediately make you think that this must be racial, right? Because if the West is white people and white people have this view of society, then clearly it's a racial thing. But the truth is, you go to Japan and they have very similar beliefs. Now, modern day Japan, not ancient Japan. Again, you don't want to live in ancient Japan. They are very, very cruel, and Confucius's writings actually make it very clear that the rulers are allowed to be very, very cruel because the emperor is also a god. And so from that stems just immeasurable suffering. But Western society takes hold in Japan in a way that most of the African nations have not yet experienced. But it does take hold in Japan, and Japan becomes one of the most peaceful societies you could ever live in. Same with South Korea. Definitely societies that most people want to. So clearly, it's not a racial thing. There's something much deeper. You even find that in Western societies. You will find black people, brown people, colored people, Asian people, people of all stripes who have absolutely assimilated to the Western mind and to the Western viewpoint. So it's not a racial thing. It's a belief thing. Because in the same way that you have immigrants and foreigners who act in incredibly vile and despicable manners, you also have leaders in the West, white people, who act in that same vile manner. Their violence may look different, but their violence is no less violent. Their hatred is no less hateful. If you look at the Charlie Kirk killing, Charlie Kirk wasn't killed by a foreigner. Charlie Kirk wasn't killed by a migrant. Charlie Kirk was killed by an idea, a prevailing idea that if we can just get rid of all the people that are intolerant, then tolerance will flourish. Of course, the idea isn't really to build tolerance. The idea is to build supremacy. The idea is to build a one world system where only the ideas of the left can really penetrate. And so to get rid of the people that you don't agree with is the only way to do that. Now, in order to explain to you why this isn't merely a left versus right thing, why you can't just look at it as, oh yeah, it's all these left-wing governments, the Democrats in America, the Labour Party in the UK, but it's broader than that. It's all of our leaders. I'm going to take you to a different part of the world. We've been in the Middle East. Let's go to South Africa. And I'm going to use a government in South Africa that I think explains it better than any other. The National Party. Now, I know that for a lot of people, the National Party is a sore spot. Both Afrikaner and non-Afrikaner are alike. Different people have different reasons for hating the National Party. But there's something to be said about the evolution of the National Party that expresses the cycle of strong men or good men, dependent on which version of the quote you read, creates good times create bad men create bad times. And that cycle plays itself out perfectly in the National Party. So when Hendrik Verwoerd and the original founding fathers of apartheid come to power, they have a couple of things in common. The first is a deep, deep love for God, an absolute fundamental love for God, and an absolute love for their own people. Hendrik Verwoerd is not, as he was labeled by some, a race traitor or a man that didn't. He loved Afrikaners. But because he loves his own people, but he also loves God, he understands that the system of apartheid has to be something specific and it can't be anything else because anything else will make this system a really corrupt and really bad system. So when you go back and you read the things that Hendrik Verwoerd wrote and you watch the things that Hendrik Verwoerd said, there's a couple of things that stand out. The first is that Hendrik Verwoerd never argued that apartheid needs to be a permanent thing. In fact, Hendrik Verwoerd himself said, you will not keep the people of South Africa apart forever. That's not possible. People have a natural tendency to want to come together. So to try and fight this, to try and keep them apart forever, that's not going to work. At some point, the walls are going to crack, they're going to break, and then people are going to come together. So he understands that. The second reason why he believes that apartheid can't be permanent is corruption. He understands full well that a system so overwhelmingly totalitarian in its approach will become an absolute scourge if you allow it. So, Hendrik Verwoerd proposes a solution. And I want people to understand this is going to be what I'm about to say might inflame some people. And some of you might listen to this and go, what the did you just say? Apartheid was to the benefit of the black man, at least in the original system. Allow me to explain. You have a white population of between 2 and 4 million people who are well educated, very well educated. And please understand, I'm not making an IQ argument here. It's not that white people were smarter than black people. It's that white people were educated. They sent their kids to school. Their kids got a formal education. This was super important. At the time, you have a black majority who is largely completely uneducated. They don't understand how economies work. They don't understand how value really works. These societies are largely agrarian. They have their cattle, they plant a little bit, and that's the end of it. If apartheid was not installed, what would have followed would have been, within a decade, the complete and utter enslavement of the entire black population. And it wouldn't even need to be a formal form of slavery. It would be what we have today. And I understand this is an incredibly touchy subject. I understand that. But think about what happens today. We all have maids, or many of us have maids, right? Do you truly believe that you pay your maid what she's worth? Do you genuinely believe that? Because I know I don't. I have a maid that comes in once a week. I pay her 350 Rand for half a day. She works literally for half a day and then she goes home. The reason I pay her only for half a day and the reason I make sure that she only has to work half a day is because I understand that that's what she is asked to do, I would not do for 350 Rand. I just would not. If you asked me to clean your toilets and clean your bathroom and clean your room and wash your clothes, I would charge you at minimum 1,000 Rand for that. At minimum, if I'm even willing to do it for 1,000. Now, why am I able to do that? Now, I go through a lot of pain to try and make sure that my maid only has to clean the most bare essential things because I understand that I'm not paying her what she's worth, but I can also not afford to pay her more. I wish I could, but I can't, right? So I go through great pains to ensure that she's only there for half a day and then she goes home and she's well taken care of. I make sure that there's food for her to eat and all the rest of it. So I go through all of that, right? But why am I able to do it? And this is an uncomfortable conversation. And please understand, I'm not making an argument here for mandatory minimum wage. Because if the government suddenly came in and said, I have to pay her a minimum of 1,000 Rand a day, I would fire her. So where she used to get 350 Rand for the day, she would no longer get any money because I would just not keep her around. It's as simple as that. But why am I able to pay her 350 Rand for the day? Because she doesn't have the necessary education to understand the value of her own labor. She just doesn't understand the economic implications of her labor. And so I and millions of others have the ability to take advantage of that. Now take that back 60, 70, 80 years to the founding of apartheid. And we actually have legislation that proves this. The Land Act. The Land Act was not, as many black people were taught, an anti-black act. In fact, the main purpose of the Land Act had nothing to do with white people's land being under threat. Most black people will focus only on the Land Act and say that it forbade black people from purchasing land in white areas. That was not a problem. Black people were not en masse purchasing property in white areas. The problem was the reverse. You had all of these European settlers moving in, and yes, at that time they were settlers. If they've been here now for a couple of generations, they're citizens. It changes. Everyone are settlers somewhere until they are not, right? So fundamentally, you had these Europeans who came in, and these Europeans understood that the chieftain of this Bantustan doesn't understand the value of his own land. And so what they did was they would go to this chieftain and tell this chieftain, I will buy this field from you for $100. The chieftain thinks, well, 100 Rand, really? Whoa, that's nuts. Holy crap, that's so cool. I get $100. What he doesn't understand is that what's underneath that land is worth millions. There's gold, there's diamonds, there's steel, there's all manner of things underneath. Well, not steel, there's iron. But there's all manner of goods under that land that chieftain just doesn't see, because the chieftain does not have a formal education that allows him to understand the exploitation of land, and that land's value doesn't just lie on the grass that grows on it, but really on what you can do with it later on. And so the apartheid government steps in and says, no more. You don't get to buy this land any longer. So the Land Act comes in and it stops that practice. But Hendrik Verwoerd doesn't stop there. Hendrik Verwoerd, in knowing that mankind will always try and come together, he proposes an education system. We need to educate the black population so that when we finally do come together, the transition can be seamless. It will just happen automatically. You'll have these prospering societies, both black and white, that just merge naturally and just continue flourishing. So Bantu education is invented, and originally it's not meant to be a weaker education system than the white population, but it is tailored to the black masses because most of them don't have a culture of education. Most of their parents aren't educated. You have to start small and then work your way to mathematics and science and all the rest. So there's a process, right? And the process is there. You can go read it. That was always the plan. Apart from just the education system, they also then start to reach out to the leaders of the black populations to try and get African languages to actually transform into educational languages so that now you can educate in your own language. All of this is meant to highlight the temporary nature of apartheid, understanding that at some point people will come together, and at that point, you need to have everyone on the same page. You need to have the black population that fully understands math, science, economics, the complicated nature of life. And you need a white population that understands the same thing so that they can come together and prosper. What happens after Verwoerd is assassinated? We see a slow decline in the quality of leadership within the National Party. And at some point, some people say it's at the early 80s, some people say it's in the late 70s. There's even people that say it happened at the early 70s mark. But the leadership of the National Party no longer really loves their people. They don't really care about the Afrikaner. They care about themselves. They care about their own power. They have made themselves gods. They are above the law. They can do whatever they want, and no one can tell them otherwise. And they now have a separate vision, a vision of this eternal system that grants them absolute authority over the country. Because the black people are subdued, they can't rise up. The white people aren't enough to rise up. And you have the black people to use as a sort of threat against the white people. Yeah, we have to do all of these things in order to stop the black people from conquering you. So it's perfect, right? It's perfect. We have this constant threat that allows us to grab more and more power for ourselves. We suppress that threat by making their education system as poor as possible, by keeping them economically as destitute as possible, by designing the system so that it benefits us and our friends and no one else, because this is also a big misconception about apartheid, that all white people benefited from it. I can tell you, as a personal story, my family did not benefit from apartheid one bit, but that's a separate story. So fundamentally, you have the system, and that system comes to its ultimate end with F.W. de Klerk. And I don't think I need to really go into detail about just how little F.W. de Klerk gave a crap about the Afrikaner people. We saw that from the very get-go in how they negotiated with the ANC. They did not negotiate with the ANC on behalf of the Afrikaner people. In fact, every promise they made to the Afrikaner people, they immediately reneged upon and said, well, so long, good luck, have fun. They got what they wanted. They got very rich. Their friends got very rich. And we here in South Africa are still paying the price for this. And it all came from leaders who no longer loved their people and who did not love God. They couldn't care less. So now the question becomes, and this is where I come to you, chat. I thank you for indulging me on this history lesson. How long do you think will people take this? Yakus Labert, how you doing, sir? Unnamed, how you doing? David, how you doing? Manik, how you doing? Shri, okay, how you doing? Hope you guys are super well. Vadzarko, how you doing? If FW didn't care, he would not have done what he did. Today, the Afrikaners are weaned off the state and self-sufficient. It did come from love. It did not come from love. Afrikaners are weaning themselves off the state and becoming self-sufficient in spite of what F.W. de Klerk did. Don't look at the outcome and somehow think that was always the plan. That was never the plan. The plan for F.W. de Klerk, the plan for Rupert and all the rest of them was always self-enrichment. It was always self-enrichment. That's the only thing they ever cared about. They couldn't care less about any of the other people and how that would actually play out. I like your take on my previous post, please, if you have time. Manic, let me see. Philosophical question. How tolerant should we be for intolerance? If we stand up against intolerance, does that not just make us intolerant? So Manic, they will argue that it is tolerant to be intolerant of intolerance, right? So if I'm killing you for being intolerant, I am in fact tolerant. So they view themselves as warriors in the global battle against intolerance. But my question to you guys stand: how long will people actually accept this? How long will this stuff happen? How many more people have to be beheaded in Ireland? How many more people or women, girls have to be raped in England? How long does this happen before the Western mind finally stands up and says, enough? We have had enough. This to this moment and no further. Even so, the state was so fragile that a single term can cause such destruction, then it's still a state that cannot be supported. Sure, okay, you're not wrong, right? The state was incredibly fragile, but that's exactly the point, right? Because these leaders just did not really care about their own people. They weren't trying to uphold the state. They weren't trying to make the state strong. They were just trying to enrich themselves. And so the entire move to abolish apartheid was to enrich themselves. It had nothing to do with setting black people free, because I think if there's one thing that I would make the argument for, and I would ask this, are black people actually free today? If we're going to be honest, here in South Africa, are black people free? Because I would argue no. I mean, you're free to vote, but you're not free to take care of yourself. You're not free to work. You're not free to participate in the economy or in the education system, at least the education system that still works, in no tangible way that actually makes people's lives better. Are black people more free today than what they were under apartheid? In none. So there the question becomes, was the plan ever to set black people free? And the answer is no. They never actually cared about setting black people free. That's not the purpose of the modern day government. More black people are included, but by their own merit. If they got A and up, they're not free. They're captured by the political system that put them there. Sure, okay, so black people are free to participate, but the economy that you and I get to participate in has shrunk to the point where it's like saying, well, you're free to run in the race if you can get over this ocean, but the boat also has holes in it, so you can't cross the ocean to become part of the race. So really, you're not really free, right? At least in no way that matters. Desiree, how are you doing? Thank you very much. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. I don't like going into these massive. I like history and I like going into historical lessons, but I know that most of you don't sign up for it. So I'm glad that you guys enjoyed it. So how long will people take this? I think is the main question. And the answer is as long as they must. And this is where the global elite is starting to run out of runway. People can take a lot. You look at South Africa, for example, and you look specifically and here I will use the example of the colored people in South Africa. During apartheid, the colored people largely accepted the system because, they weren't black enough for the ANC to really care about them, and they weren't white enough for the apartheid government to really care about them. And so, you do what you do. What else is there? Then, for 32 years of new rule, the colored people again just sort of accepted it because they're not black enough for the ANC to really care, and they're not white enough to really be part of the white people. Although we are seeing that changing. White people and colored people are starting to take hands a lot more in this country. Minorities are starting to connect a lot more. And we actually have a much larger base today than what we've ever had before, because it's no longer really just black and brown people and white people. It's now more conservative minded people, or what I would call strong men versus weak men. That's the battle now. And if you look at the strong men in our society, you will find that it crosses races. There are plenty of black people in South Africa that are as strong as most white people that care about love and God and freedom and their country and their people. So this is happening, but it's still slow. The fact of the matter is, the global elites were desperately trying to build a system for their own depravity, to feed their own depravity. A system where they are above the law. They can do whatever they want. Here in South Africa, we see it all the time. I mean, you look at the latest scandal. I shared it with you guys this morning, of the pension funds being robbed. They do whatever they want. They don't really care, right? All throughout the world, you see the same thing playing out. You see Keir Starmer appointing known pedophiles as ambassadors to America because the guy is a friend, right? And then gets caught and nothing ever happens to him. You see every single one of these global leaders embroiled in catastrophe and controversy day after day, and it never actually gets better. It never actually gets better. And they never actually face the consequences because they are above the law. And the whole purpose of what they're trying to push is that system where they have the ultimate authority and power, and everyone else serves them, serves their interests. The problem is that they have run out of room. So, how long, and I do believe this, and you guys can mark this down. Mark this down. Graham, thank you very much. Wonderful. Wonderful. How you doing, sir? Thank you so much for saying hello to everyone that comes in. I truly appreciate that, wonderful. Anita, how you doing? Um, there will be a revolution in Europe within the next 5 years. I want to say sooner, but it's not without merit, right? It's not as if the left doesn't still have a couple of tricks up their sleeve, but there will be a revolution. I believe that South Africa will probably have its revolution far sooner. I would actually be willing to bet that there is going to be a violent revolution within South Africa, probably within the next 3 years. And I'm not. This is not. This is a prediction. I'm not saying that it will absolutely, but this is my prediction. Steve, how you doing, sir? The thing is, you can already see just with President Trump providing legitimacy to the Afrikaner cause, you're seeing a massive surge in South Africa from not just Afrikaners, but also from the minority, the conservative in South Africa, black, brown, Indian, colored, all of them, starting to push back, right? There's almost a renewed energy in the fight against the wickedness of the communist terrorist ANC party and their communist terrorist supporters. This pushback is not going to be without violence from the other side. The ANC at some point is going to have to become violent in order to stop the pushback from these forces. That's why I believe that South Africa will see a civil war before the rest of the world does, or at least a revolution. If not a civil war, at least a revolution that will happen. Steve, yeah. Well, Joe, yeah. We are still live. It's There's a couple of things that is very required for a society to become violent in their pushback. I've already laid out the first part of that before the history lesson. The first part is when people look at their leaders and they realize that those leaders are the source of the chaos, people are much more inclined to through force reinforce order, because humans fundamentally are order creating creatures. We like order. We find ourselves very uncomfortable when we exist without order, and so we will demand it even through violence. We want order. And what does order look like in a society? It looks like high trust. I need to know that I know the rules. I also need to know that everyone else that shares my society knows the rules, and we need to know that we know the rules. This is order to us. Anything short of that creates this uncomfortable experience. And I don't think a lot of people you guys will learn to understand this for those of you that are watching from other countries. There are things that you have not yet experienced. And I know because whenever I speak to people from other countries and I tell them what life is like in South Africa, they are shocked. They're almost dumbfounded. Like, how can you live like that? I'll give you guys an example. Last night I'm leaving church because we have Bible study on a Wednesday. It's just after 9, and I'm driving home, and it's very foggy. It's like super foggy. You can literally not see 50 meters out. So everything's eerie, but also the streets are empty. Normally at that time, there's still people walking around, especially on the beach. It's like it's still busy at 9:20, 9:30 in the evening on the beach. But this time it's dead quiet. Dead, dead, dead quiet. Um, and as I'm driving up to the robot or the traffic light, as you guys call it in the rest of the world, I'm scanning. And this is an automatic thing. It just you do it in South Africa. I'm scanning for movement because I know that criminals like waiting at traffic lights and block you in and then hijack you. So I'm scanning for movement. I'm looking at all the corners that is close enough to the robot that if someone hides there, they could probably make it to where I am. I'm just doing that. And I get to the robot and the robot goes green and I start driving down Beach Road. And I'm looking, constantly looking, seeing if someone is jumping out in front of the car, seeing if something's happening, looking at the cars parked next to the road to see if one of those cars start up, just in case. And this is just natural. I'm just doing it. I always do it. But last night it became sort of, it became obvious to me, like, what am I doing? Um, and I drive up back to the main street to actually go home. And there's a car at the robot before me or right in front of me. And I'm parking at least a car length away from that car. And why am I doing that? Because if that car has sort of a bad design, it wants to do something, I'm able to speed away and I still have space to maneuver. I can get away. Again, just supernatural. This is just what you do when you live in South Africa. This is where your mind goes. And this is a lesson I learned when I was 20, because I was driving in Pretoria on my way to campus. And as I stopped at the robot, a guy knocked on my window and he pointed a gun at me. And he said, "Give me your stuff." He didn't want my car, luckily, but I think he didn't want my car because it was heavy traffic. So he knew even if he took my car, he wouldn't be able to get away. It's literally bumper to bumper. So he just stood there, pointed a gun at me, took my wallet, took my phone, took everything I had, and left. And he walked away. Walked away. That was the moment that I decided I will never again park in such a way that I can't get away. So I always leave space between me and the car in front. This is stuff that you just learn. When you walk into your house, when you drive into your driveway, you don't just get out. You look in the mirrors to make sure that it's clear. When you open the door, you sort of check your house for anything that is out of place. Because maybe someone came in while you were away, so now you're checking the windows. Like, just as I walk in, I have a pretty open plan house. It's not that large. So I walk in and my immediate look is, Colleen, this is South Africa. So, where I was hijacked, this was in Pretoria. My immediate thing is I walk in the door and I look at the two big windows and the door that I have at the back, because I'm looking to see if there's glass that's broken, if there's something that's going wrong. I want to make sure that the house has not been broken into at the moment of me entering the house, because if it has been, I now have to change my approach to entering the house. Instead of entering a place of safety, I'm now entering a battleground, right? I'm going to go kill an intruder. So things are going to change. Let's just say that. This is a natural thing that you do in South Africa. This is natural life in South Africa. Now, sure, some people aren't as uh, aware. I think maybe because my dad is incredibly, as we say in Afrikaans, paraat. Um, I was I was brought up. This is just what I do every night before bed. I check every single window, check every single door. I check every single closet, everywhere where someone could maybe hide if they managed to get in during the day. This is just natural, right? This is how we do things. Um, Most people in the rest of the world don't understand this. Most people in the rest of the world would not understand what this feels like. But that's where you're headed. That is where you're headed. And you're heading that way because the weak men in control have this philosophy that all men just want to be good. And that because now remember, if you're starting from the position that all people are just good and want to be good, then you need an explanation for why some people try to behead people in the middle of the street. Because if all people just want to be good, someone trying to behead someone in the middle of the street does not look like someone that just wants to be good. If all people just want to be good, you need an explanation that accounts for why 200 armed men breaks through the border of a nation and kills and abducts 1,200 people, and then continues to grape over 200 women for more than a year as prisoners. You need an explanation. If all people just want to be good, that can't be explained. So what is the explanation then? Well, it must be that we are doing something wrong. And by we, of course, I mean you. You conservatives. You that keep saying that we shouldn't take them. When you say to a refugee, you're not welcome in my country, you're effectively telling that refugee that he must kill. Now think about the mindset of that. What kind of person are you if the mere fact that someone isn't nice to you drives you to want to cut off their head? What kind of person are you at that point? That's not the mark of a good person. When's the last time you've been chased out of a building, out of a shop or out of a whatever, and your immediate thought was your head is off. I'm cutting off your head now. No, if someone chases you out of their house, you just go, well, all right, dude, no worries, and you go. Right? Like, why would you stay where you're not wanted? But of course, if my philosophy is that all people just want to be good, and remember, it's important that that philosophy exists, because if as society we have to confront the fact that humans are incredibly vile, wicked, and evil, we automatically have to say, well, something has to stop that wickedness and that villainous evil. Our ancestors had that. They had God. They understood. They understood that the heart of man is intimately wicked. And so if you forsake God, you are automatically on this track, and there is nothing you can do about it. You will eventually lead yourself into destruction. It will happen. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And that is where we are at the moment. We are at a place where the question becomes, when did the good and honest people reach a point that they've had enough, where they just say no more, to here and no further? I'll give you guys another example of the absolute decline of our society. Here, by the way, you have the minister in Northern Ireland that says that she wishes people didn't see the video of the man being beheaded. Actually, let's listen to what this. Listen to this because it gives you a perfect example of how wicked the left actually is.
About the influence that he wields?
Not to my knowledge. I haven't had a chance to speak to the PSNI this morning. Last night it was very fresh, it was very new, but they did advise me that CID would be looking into these threats and taking them very seriously, which has been a comfort, I have to say. But at the minute, we don't know where they've originated from. No.
And, you know, Monday night was horrific. And so many people saw that image. I wish people didn't see that image, but unfortunately, many people did. But it
So, what the politicians are saying is they're not sorry that a migrant from the third world, a Muslim, tried to behead a man in the middle of the street. That's not why they're sorry. They're sad that people saw it because now people are angry. And of course, they're blaming Tommy Robinson and Elon Musk because if it wasn't for Tommy Robinson and Elon Musk, people wouldn't have seen it. And then they could have gone on pretending like all migrants are just peace loving, good, and ordinary people. And the people would just wonder why their heads are constantly being cut off by these peaceful and loving Muslims. That's the takeaway. Or if you really want evidence of the decline of society, take Reverend Ray Sistman here. Anthony Carmelo went to an athletic day, killed, let's be clear, he murdered a student. He tried to claim that it was in self-defense, but all of the eyewitnesses said the same thing. He was the one who provoked it. He was the one who went to them with a knife and then stabbed the boy. Yesterday, he got 35 years in prison under Texas law. And here you have this reverend saying no black mother should ever fear sending her son to a high school track meet only for him to lose his life to the prison system from a murder conviction. This is the decline of the West. And the problem is that the wicked and the leftists in our society have learned that they can use the tolerance of our societies to their advantage. Because in no way, shape, or form, I don't care how big of a supporter you want to be of your race. When the story came out, and I remember this vividly, you guys remember those 4 boys that killed a black guy? This was years ago. I think they were called the Waterkloof 4, the Waterkloof 4. Do you guys remember that? Where they beat the man. I think they beat him to death. I just remember it was national news. It was everywhere. Everyone was talking about it. And I remember every single person in my family, and we are staunch Afrikaners. I even have some uncles that are super racist. But every single member of my family said they have to go to prison for the rest of their lives. That is unacceptable. Even as a staunch supporter of their own race, I heard racists say they must go to prison for the rest of their lives. That is unacceptable. And there's a reason for it. If you're a decent person, and by the way, I'm not saying that all racists are decent people, but I'm also not saying sometimes people are racist because they don't understand. They don't know, right? They were brought up in an area where The only examples they ever see are examples that they don't understand, and that creates all manner of confusion. But even someone like that, if you are a good and decent person, you will look at such an event and you will go, I will not defend you. I cannot defend you. You have no right to take another human's life. End of discussion. But of course, that's not what's happening in our society today, and it's not happening for a very specific reason. The left needs this system. You see, because for the left, for the weak men in our society, and by the way, when I say left here and weak men, I include the vast majority of Republican senators and congressmen. I include the vast majority of conservative government in the UK. I include almost all of the members of the DA. I probably also include a bunch of members of the Freedom Front Plus, just to be super, super clear. I do not believe that the left-right political divide means good and bad people on either side. I will go so far as to say that every single person on the left is a wicked and vile and evil person. And I would say that a lot of people on the right are wicked, vile, and evil people. You have this tiny little remnant, this small group of people on the right. And maybe if you're lucky, a fraction of a percentage of people on the center left that I would argue is actually good people. Right? Like maybe they're good people. But for the rest, for the masses of wicked and vile and evil people in this world, the idea that is being espoused is the following. The leaders want absolute control. It is what they thirst for. It is what they hunger for. They want a government system like China, a system where they and they alone are in control and they get to call the shots. In order to do this, they need a massive, massive amount of useful idiots. Those would be the supporters of these politicians. Those are the people who are today screaming and yelling that white Irishmen are rising up and saying enough is enough, and saying that the biggest threat to the UK, and I saw the posts on X, isn't a migrant trying to slice off someone's head in the middle of the road. That's not the biggest threat. The biggest threat are white men not willing to have their heads cut off by migrants in the middle of the street. That's the biggest threat. Now, why exactly are these useful idiots like Peter Kriel, like Kim Heller, like Carl Niehaus, why are they supporting this evil? Because they believe that when the dust settles, they'll be part of the ruling elite. And we know this because there's, again, actual evidence for it. I think I've told you guys before, how many of you know who Alexander Solzhenitsyn is? Comments that the media is doing its best to convince us that you are either left or right when the norm is a bell-shaped curve with the majority in the center and the radical on the edges. The fatigue is real. Yep, that's only God's control, not humans' control. Colleen, very, very true. Only in the West is the concept of racism a thing. Also true. It's never going to stop unless it is physically stopped. No amount of marching or protest will stop it. I do agree with you, yes, and that's why the boats have mainly men of a certain age on them, no women or children. They are invading. Your devil, I absolutely agree with you. It is an invasion. But do you guys know who Alexander Solzhenitsyn is? If you do know, bear with me. If you don't know, I'll just very quickly explain it. Alexander Solzhenitsyn is a Russian that fiercely supported the communist revolution. Fiercely. This man was absolutely bought into communism. He believed that communism will lead to a better life for all. And for a long time, Alexander Solzhenitsyn was actually doing quite well under communism. He was very intelligent. He was one of the intelligentsia in Russia. And so he had some esteem. But you see, Alexander Solzhenitsyn was one of the few that you could call a true believer. And remember, at this time, communism has never been tried before. So it's not like he can point to other eras in history and say, well, it's never worked, so clearly it won't work. Although if you read the Gulag archipelago, it becomes very clear that he probably would have. If Alexander Solzhenitsyn lived today, he would not have been a communist in the first place. But nevertheless, he becomes a little disillusioned with the Russian state as he sees these leaders take control and sort of do the very thing that they're complaining the capitalists did. For his dissent from the government, and I'm leaving a lot of stuff out because, I don't want to put you guys through another history lesson, but for his dissent, he gets thrown in the gulags. The Russian state will not be questioned. And so he gets thrown in the gulags. And he actually, originally, is quite happy about this. Because in Alexander Solzhenitsyn's mind, because this is a Karl Marxian idea. This idea, by the way, that all men are good, that's Karl Marx. Karl Marx believed that. Again, you have to look at Karl Marx and you have to read his work. But if you have, you will know that Karl Marx believes that man is simply the product of his economic situation. And so men are not greedy by default. Men are not violent or evil by default. Men are fundamentally good. It's capitalism that makes people evil. And Alexander Solzhenitsyn believes this. So he believes that in the gulags, he's going to see the true peace, harmony, and beauty of man. Because in the gulags, everyone is a prisoner. Everyone is equal. So there, he will finally see the future of Russia and of the world. Except Alexander Solzhenitsyn would learn in the gulags that it is not poverty or capitalism or anything else that drives human wickedness. It is humanity that drives human wickedness. The things he saw happen in the gulags, the things he saw people do in the gulags, convinced him there is no good in mankind. Mankind is abhorrently evil. The only thing that stops mankind from being true to his evil nature is good men with guns enforcing the law. And then everyone must be equal under that law. You can't have some people be more equal than others because that creates a whole new set of problems. This is what Hendrik Verwoerd saw. This is why Hendrik Verwoerd understood that apartheid can't be a permanent system. Because if it's permanent, bad men will start to corrupt it. It has to be a temporary system until all people are on the same playing field, and then everyone will be free. That was the idea, at least. That died the day he died. And from there, it's just a bad set of people that do worse and worse and worse. We are currently living through the greatest communist, we're on the cusp of communist victory. We're on the cusp of communist victory. The war that started in the 1920s with the Red Revolution is on the cusp of victory. They've managed to gain control of every society on Earth. I fundamentally believe that the only country in the world today that can truly claim that it is not under communist control is America and Argentina. These are the only, and El Salvador. Excuse me. There's 3 countries in the world that are not under communist control. The problem for all of those countries is that the communists in the rest of the world are starting to accelerate their plans. Because communism has not offered or delivered on its fundamental promise, which is this prosperity that everyone should be enjoying. Instead, it's delivering the opposite of that. They were hoping that it would they were hoping that the revolution would be more successful faster, so that by the time this dystopia finally manifested, they would already have absolute power. I believe that civil war in Europe is coming, and I believe it's going to be here within the next 5 years. And I believe that at the time, it's going to be a very small minority that is going to be left to fight the wicked and the evil that are communist. I believe the exact same thing is happening in South Africa, where it's going to be a very tiny group of people who are left to fight the mass terrorists in this nation. This is why the ANC is working tirelessly to try and unite Africa, because the idea in uniting Africa is that the state will be so powerful that no one group can actually overthrow it. This is the idea. This is the plan. Because it's not, you need to start looking at these systems as connected. The African Union is not built as a union on its own. The European Union isn't built on its as a union on its own. The Chinese Union, and yes, China does have designs to effectively bring the whole of Asia under the Chinese flag in one way or another. China has never been that imperialist, to be fair. They're not really a conquering nation, but they will bring them under the umbrella through economic slavery. But the ultimate idea is that when you have these three unions that are now set up, the Asian Union, the European Union, and the African Union, these three unions then merge into a super union. And the super union then controls the majority of the populations of the world. And so the populations no longer have the ability to overthrow the state because the state is simply too powerful. It is effectively taking the Russian plan. This is what the Russians did. The Soviet Union was this collection of different states that all became part of the Union. And the Russians had hoped that this would make them so strong. And this is genuinely what happened. Whenever a nation in the Soviet Union would start to rise up, that nation would then get all of the other Soviet Union nations to crush the revolution in that nation. Right? So if you're revolting against the globalist power, you're not just revolting against your own government, you're revolting against the world's government. And obviously what that means is if this plan went to its fruition, to its fullness, you and I here in South Africa would rise up and we would start a revolution to try and free ourselves from the tyranny of communism. And what you would immediately find is German, French, British, and Chinese soldiers in South Africa crushing our revolution. Because right now there's peace in the other countries, so now this country that is stepping out will be destroyed. But that's the idea. The idea is that by uniting, you become so powerful that any dissent can immediately be crushed. Because individually, these countries can't stand up against their own people, because you don't need that many, just FYI. And they're not stupid. You need about 5 to 10% of a country's population to successfully carry out a revolution. 5 to 10%. Throughout history, successful revolutions have been carried out by between 5 and 10% of the population. The vast majority of people in any country does not participate in the revolution. But if suddenly the whole world is under the same banner, now 5 to 10% in a specific country is not enough to carry out that revolution. Because the government of the world can respond in overwhelming force and crush that revolution. That is where we're headed. I don't believe we'll get there, because I think it will melt before we ever have the opportunity to get there. I think the governments of the world have overplayed their hand. I think America serves as a great bulwark against this. I don't think America is going to go along. And before people say, I was listening. This was actually super cool. I was listening to a podcast before the stream started from Trigonometry, and they had Patrick Boyle. He's a financial YouTuber, but he actually teaches at university, and he owned his own hedge fund for many years before he became a professor of economics. And he actually explained um, the only country in the world that can get away with the mismanagement of their economy in the way that the world mismanages its economy is America. Now, Patrick Boyle is an Irishman, so he's not an American. And he makes a lot of videos criticizing America. But he actually explains it incredibly well. And this is for all the BRICS lovers out there who thinks that BRICS and Russia and China is somehow going to kick America in the balls and then America is going to be on its own. So here's how it works. All countries, all throughout the world, needs a place to store their money, because, well, that means that country will go bankrupt very quickly, actually. So where do countries store their money? In bonds, because bonds give yield, right? So your money is actually making more money. And since governments don't do their own business, doesn't help that the government has billions of dollars in cash, because the government can't do anything with those dollars. So it's better to just keep that money in bonds. But bonds is the buying of debt, right? When you buy a bond from a government, you're buying that government's debt. Now, China could, step up, and China could say, we're no longer going to buy American bonds. Okay? So now China sells all America's bonds. But now China sits with billions of dollars worth of cash that, if China holds on to this cash for too long, that cash will destroy the economy. So what does China actually do? What can China do? Well, they'll buy European bonds, because that's all they can buy. There's no other country in the world that has enough bonds to actually sustain it. So even if China said, okay, we'll buy all of the bonds in Africa and we'll buy all of the bonds in Asia, those countries are there going to go, okay, thanks for buying our bonds, but now we have all of this cash. What are we going to do with it? Eventually, they're going to go buy European bonds, because Europe is the only other power in the world that can actually handle it. Here's the thing. Europe doesn't make a lot of debt. Historical reasons, but Europe doesn't make a lot of debt. So what does Europe do? Europe buys American bonds, because no government can sit on cash. Cash is bad for governments. Creates insane inflation and creates all manner of problems because of how the economy of the world is set up. But effectively, governments can't sit on cash. So no matter where the money goes to, the money will always end in the American economy. And the reason it will always end in the American economy is because the American economy is the only economy strong enough to absorb the money. There's famously, and this Patrick Boyle also said, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was I think in the 80s, he was the chair for the Federal Reserve. And he said famously in a meeting, I think with England, it is our money, but it's your problem. He was in a meeting where some of the world leaders were complaining about America printing too much money. And he said, it's our money, but it's your problem. You need us more than we need you. So we'll do what we want, and you'll end up paying for it. And that is sadly the reality of it. There's no other reality to it. America is the only country that can survive the current printing of money that is happening throughout the world. So I told you guys, remember the question we're still dealing with, how much will people be willing to take? So the first is people are already on the verge of breaking. Their societies have changed past the point that they can understand. The second, the words that used to dissuade action no longer have any meaning. It used to be that you don't want to be called a racist. That no longer matters. No one really cares if you call them a racist. I know I don't, and I'm pretty sure most people don't. If someone said, "Oh, Stephen, you're such a racist," I go, "Okay, cool." I know I'm not a racist, not in the real sense of the word, but I also don't really care if you think I'm a racist because I'm not living here to get your approval for anything. So fundamentally, that has gone away, right? No one really cares anymore if you call them a racist. Then you have the frustration of a society changing past the point of acceptance. Because the left believes all people are good and nice, the left allowed very bad people to enter their societies. Their hope, of course, was that those people would side with them and slaughter the people that they see as their intellectual enemies. That was always the hope. That these violent criminals from third world countries would come into these countries. They'll see, wow, look how tolerant these leftists are. I won't kill them because they're tolerant. I'll kill all the people that are intolerant. But increasingly, that's not what we see. These migrants couldn't care less if you're tolerant or not. They kill indiscriminately. They don't care. So you have all of that. But believe it or not, that's not enough. People can take that. People will adapt to that. Look at what happens in South Africa. Look at how much the Afrikaner and the conservative people in South Africa have adapted. We've built our own fortresses, right? We have our own security villages. We are just everywhere, right? Taking care of ourselves. People can do that. See, but this is where the final match comes in. The economy. See, people will take a lot and they'll swallow a lot, provided that they can shield themselves from the chaos. When that goes away, when there's no longer the ability to shield myself from the chaos, that's when violence ensues. And the problem is that the West is on the verge of collapse insofar as economies are concerned. Almost every country in the West, except for America, is completely over leveraged. The same is true here in South Africa. This is why I believe South Africa is on the cusp, far closer to a violent revolution than the rest of the West. I believe that South Africa's revolution is going to happen because in the very near term, the South African government is finally going to run out of money. It's already happening. All it needs now is one more global catastrophe. One global hiccup. And it sends this country into a spiral. And when people can't eat, that's when they get violent. So I believe on that basis and that basis alone, South Africa will have its revolution. That revolution is then going to set off the revolutions in the West. But I do believe that revolution is coming. There's no way around it. And then you get that group that believes they can't be racist or they have a right to be. So Yodevalet, this is again the extrapolation of weak men and weak philosophies, right? The weak philosophies have allowed for what we would otherwise consider to be barbarians to think that they are the civilized. Because that's not a notion that is shared by the majority. If you look in America, for example, the majority of people that speak out against, for example, this reverend that complains that a murderer got life in prison are black people. It's black people pushing back. And so it is this civilization, the civilized versus the barbarians. And sadly, the left-wing talking points, the way the left believes, have allowed for the barbarians to believe that they are the civilized. But that will usually not last long. They've run out of money to steal. True. England is no more army or navy. Joe Texas, yes, but I actually don't think that would even be helpful. I know I won the argument when they call me racist. In fact, I would go so far as to say it's probably in the UK government's interest not to have an army. And I would also like to point out this, and I'm not going to say that this is absolutely how they think, because maybe that would be a bit too top-down, maniacal way of thinking or looking at it. But throughout history, armies have generally not sided with the government. Take care of yourself, 140. I'm so sorry that is happening, sir. Because the army are citizens too. Shanta, yes. Throughout history, in almost every single revolution, the army does not side with the government. The army fundamentally sides with the people against the government. Because remember, the soldiers have family members. They have wives and children who are their people. So it's probably better for places like the UK and Europe not to have large armies, because if you do, if the revolution starts, the guns almost never belong to the government. The guns go with the people. And again, this is indicative throughout history. Must be turning in his grave right now. Oh yeah, there are reports that King Charles converted to Islam. Do you think there are any truths to this? I don't know if King Charles turned to Islam. I do know King Charles is not a Christian, right? So whether he is a Muslim now or whether he is just an atheist, I know he's not a Christian. Because he doesn't live like a Christian. Nothing he does convinces me that man has the fruits of the Holy Spirit. And so, yeah. And South Africa, I heard the police in Ireland. Shanta, by the way, how are you doing? How are you doing, your devilate? I heard the police in Ireland are just chilling in their cars while the Patriots sort stuff out. Based. I have not seen that yet. I have seen some footage of Irish police in riot gear. So it's probably not all of, although I'm not sure how real this is. It doesn't look like it is in Ireland, but it's one of the posts I saw that I thought I'll just retweet. But this doesn't look like Irish police. But there's bad people in the police as well, you know. In fact, I would say the police is probably more often than not, the police are probably the ones that's a little bit more on the side of on the government. So it's super important that you think from a psychological perspective. So what is the army? Why does the army famously side with the people against the government? Well, it's because of what the army's mandate is. The army's mandate is to defend their country, to give their lives in defense of their country, their people. That's why soldiers fight. Most soldiers that go to the Middle East in America, or most soldiers that go to war, they don't go to war for a government. They don't go to war for the president or for the congressman or for the senators. They go to war for the people. After 9/11, the soldiers, the Marines that went to Afghanistan did not go to Afghanistan because of a building that got crashed into. They went to war in vengeance of lives of their own people that were lost. Their people were under attack and they were answering the call. Police is different. The police are the henchmen of the government. The police does not serve the public. Please understand this. Police has never served the public. The police serve the government. Now, when your government is righteous and just, the police's job is to serve righteousness and justice. So it is to punish the wicked and reward the innocent. That's the role of the police. But the police works for the government. They're trained by the government. They work for the government. They serve the government. So when the people rise up against the government, the police will almost always side with the government because that's who they serve. That's their job. Not all. There will be cops that say, no, I will not do this, because in principle or in theory, the police is supposed to serve the public. But you serve whoever pays your bills. And in modern society, most people think that taxes is just sort of an automatic thing. So if you're a police officer, that's why you see in the UK these police officers going to arrest people for social media posts. They're doing it because the government told them to do it. That's why during COVID, you saw the police manhandling people on the most asinine things. And they did it without care, without question. The government told me to do it. My boss told me to do this. And so this is what I do. Because they don't serve the people. They serve the government. So yeah. Our police are corrupted from the head down. You're not wrong, Echo. We do not have a police service. We have squads of goons on government payroll. True. Although I would argue that's true in almost all countries. I don't know, memory serves me right. Is 6 strong. Rim, what do you mean? I bet it's the older cops chilling in their cars. It's the young cops that have been propagandized. Probably. There were 2 firemen fighting each other in Ireland. There's a video. Fire brigade was supposed to be doing riot control. Wonder which one was based. We must not forget and never forgive. Call me Amy. We must always forgive. But forgiveness sometimes doesn't mean peace. It is something that I struggle with often, is what do we do as Christians when the Bible tells us to turn the other cheek, when the Bible tells us not to go to war? What do we do as Christians? But the Bible does also give us instruction that sometimes we have to pick up the sword. Sometimes in service of righteousness, we are called to go to war. We shouldn't seek it. We should never initiate it. But sometimes, flesh and blood. There's a famous passage in the Bible where Jesus tells his disciples, and now go sell everything you have and buy a sword. And the disciples say, but we have 2. So they produce 2 swords. And Jesus says that will be enough. And Ibrahim, I can't remember his name now. He's a very famous historian on the Middle East and on the Crusades and so on. There were a group called the Hospitallers. And the Hospitallers actually took that verse and they saw it as the one sword is to fight spiritual enemies. The other sword is to fight fleshly devils. So that's the 2 swords. One for the spirit and one for the flesh. So when you're Raymond Ibrahim, that's the one, the determining. Thank you. Yes, I've started reading some of his books. It's incredible. Like his books are truly phenomenal. So yeah, at some point there is a point where Christians do have to pick up the sword, but it should never be done in vain, and it should never be done for self glory. If we do it, it must be in defense of others. Is Coptic Egyptian? Yeah, Shanta, but still very good as a historian. I truly believe in high trust society can only be maintained when the good amongst us are armed. I'm not just talking police and military, I mean civilians. By the way, I am a firm supporter of civilians having guns. And I don't believe that there should be any restriction on the kind of guns that civilians can own. If I want to own a bazooka, I should be allowed to own a bazooka. Heck, if I want to own a tank, I should be allowed to own a tank. Because if you understand why it is important for the civilian population to be armed, you will understand why no restriction on those arms can exist. The idea behind arming of civilians is for one purpose and one purpose only: to kill the government. Understand that. The citizens don't have guns to defend themselves against criminals. That's a byproduct and a happy one. If a bad guy walks up to me, I shoot him, problem solved. Yes, great. The primary purpose for the citizenry to be armed is to slaughter their government when that government becomes wicked, evil, and corrupt. The government should be deathly afraid of its citizens. Always. When you have Ramaphosa standing up there trying to tell everyone, my fellow citizens, he should be doing it while peeing himself in fear. That's the reality of it. The government shouldn't walk around like superstars. They should walk around constantly looking over their shoulder, thinking, am I doing enough to keep these people happy, or am I about to have a violent revolution here? So yeah, the citizens should be armed to the teeth. J.S. Afri, how you doing, sir? I will never forgive what the DA did in COVID, what the entire government did too. We couldn't even buy baby food, cook chicken. I will never forgive. People lost their entire livelihoods. Yes, but to not forgive is actually bad for you, right? If you don't forgive, you're the one suffering as a result of this. What I do and what I've done after COVID is simple. I have forgiven what they've done during COVID because I know that the righteous one, God himself, Jesus, will judge them. They will be judged and they will receive a fair judgment from the judge of the world. I don't have to do that. What happened. I hold them responsible for what is happening now, right? And I will act against them if they continue this wickedness and this evil. And if they start becoming violent towards me, I will act or react rather. But I don't do it out of malice or anger, even though I do sometimes get angry. Don't think I'm just better than anyone. I also get angry, but I try to remind myself always that it's not in anger that I should act, but to safeguard and to protect. That's the purpose of our actions. Well, that's why I'm drawn to you. You're a Christian as well. God bless. Colleen, thank you very much. God bless you too. And yes, I am a Christian, albeit a new one. I've only been saved for a little over 2 years. 1,000,000% agree with this. Agree so much. Turn the other cheek does not mean see how your past go past you. Then it mean give back. Clara, so I would say, first, I don't think I quite understand the point that you're making. So please forgive me if I misinterpreted what you said, and you're welcome to correct me. But turn the other cheek genuinely does mean that. If your enemy strikes you on the cheek, turn the other one. But now that does not mean if your enemy is trying to slap someone else, you must allow the enemy to just slap this other person. Right? It's a very personal call. It's the same thing when communists try to use the Bible to justify socialism. They'll say, well, Jesus said, give to the poor. Yes. Jesus said, you give to the poor. Jesus did not say, take everyone else's money and give that to the poor so that you can feel better about yourself. It is a personal thing, right? If you're a husband, for example, and someone comes to try and kill your wife, you don't get to turn the other cheek on behalf of your wife. Your wife expects you to step in between her and the attacker. She expects you to save her life. And so that's what you must do. And that does not mean that, oh, why didn't you turn the other cheek? I defended my wife. And I defended the innocent. And as Christians, we are absolutely called to defend the innocent. Give someone, but people confuse the act of forgiving as forgetting. Dominus, how you doing, sir? Wat is die gesegde van goeie mans? Jy het goeie tye, hier niks werd mans, ensovoorts. Yes, good men create good times create bad men create bad times, or weak men or strong men, dependent on, right? You have to look at the context of turn the other cheek from that time period. Well, to be fair, if we're talking about wicked and evil governments, and I want to be very, very clear on this, Paul writes to the Colossians as well as to the Ephesians, and he writes about how they should respect the government. They should respect that the government was given the sword by God. Now, during the time of Paul writing this, who is the Caesar? As Paul is writing about how they should respect those who are in power, because those who are in power was placed there by God. Who is the Caesar in Rome? It's Nero. Nero is burning Christians. In fact, Nero would use Christians as lights for his streets. And Paul writes in that time and says, you should respect the government. Right? So there is an element to turning the other cheek that sometimes does mean during very bad times, we must still respect the government. We're told to run rather than fight. So if we're being persecuted, simply go to the next town over. Simply escape. So when do we fight? We fight when there's nowhere left to run. When our enemy has pursued us to the ends of the earth and now there is nothing left, that is when we fight. So the argument for a Christian isn't that we must just allow them to kill us, right? That's not the argument. The argument for a Christian is more, we should never be the ones to start it. You only pick up the sword when there is genuinely no more options. And if you don't act, then it will be the end of the church. It will be the end of all Christians. They will kill every last Christian. That's when you act, not before. You don't make the first move. You don't plan the revolution. You don't shoot the first bullets. You wait until there is literally nothing else left. We have run where we can run. We have tried to accommodate you. We've tried to get out of the way, and you have just pursued and pursued to the point where there is nowhere else that we can go. We are stuck here now. That's when you act. Up until then, you forgive, you move on, you try to work within the system that is given to you to change the system, and you trust. And this is the thing that I want all of you to remember. Trust one thing. God is in control. And we don't understand why God allows this wicked government to continue to rule. But that's because we can't see the full picture. We are limited in what we can see. I know for a fact, because I know God is good, that whatever God's design is, it's perfect. And it will work out to be perfect. Because I know God only does what is good. Even if I can't see it, even if it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, right? Right now, I don't understand. There's a lot of things in my life that I don't understand. I don't understand why I'm single, right? I don't understand why I struggle so much to get my eating under control. I don't understand why this happens or that happens, why I don't have enough money in my bank account, or why I don't have a channel of 100,000, right? Whatever the case might be. I don't understand why I just lost my job. I don't understand why my wife just left me. I don't understand these things. But I know that if I trust in the Lord and I allow these things to bring me closer to Him and to the relationship that He wants with me, then I will end up in a better place than where I was when it started. Because God does everything for my good. He's doing it for my good. Doesn't always feel like it, right? Doesn't always feel like it, but gold doesn't always start off looking beautiful. It is the refiner's fire that turns gold beautiful. In the same way, you don't always start looking great, but through the fire, you end up being great, right? Um, so yeah, remember that. Uh, Annie, how you doing? Turn the other cheek means to expect someone to respect you as an equal. If you were slapped on the right cheek, you got a backhand slap, an insult meaning you didn't deserve respect. Annie, I think it's important not to read too much into it. Jesus is talking about forgiveness, but also talking about being meek. And I would say um, we are called to be imitators of Christ. We are called to be more like Christ. Now, here's an interesting thing. Christ says that He is like God and God is like Him, right? What is God? I mean, at His core, what is God? Think about what you and I do to God every single day. Do you slap God in the face? Yes, you do. Every single time you sin, you are sinning against God. He has to watch you do unspeakable things, things that He just, in His entire existence, He would not do. He has to watch you do it. I'll take my own life because I don't want to speak on anyone else's behalf. Before I was saved, I was a really bad guy. And I do mean really bad guy. There are stories that I won't share because it doesn't just involve me. It involves other people who I have um, I don't have their authority or their permission to share those stories. But there was a guy, someone that I love very much, who introduced me to his girlfriend, and I stole his girlfriend. Not by accident. I wanted to steal her because I cared only about what I wanted. My entire life before I was saved was about me. If you asked me to help you with something, I would do an immediate calculation. Is there anything in the immediate future that I need from you? If the answer to that was no, you would not get my help. And I would openly tell you, I'm not helping you. I don't want to. I lived my entire life to the point where people who cared about me would not ask me for favors. They knew there was no point in asking him for favors. He will not do it. I was addicted to porn. Absolutely. And I would make space in my life to get porn into those avenues. I would try to justify it. I would try to look for ways to go even deeper into it. That was the person that I was. I would lie often, right? Like lying was a second nature thing for me. I had no problem twisting the truth if it meant getting my way. None. I had no empathy for anyone else. What was I to God at that time? I was his enemy. I was his enemy. I was in open war with God. In fact, one of my favorite things used to be crushing Christians. In debates, I would say unspeakable things to Christians to get them to stop believing. In fact, there was a time before I was saved that I fundamentally believed that the only way we can deal with the only way the world would ever be free and happy is if we killed every single Christian. I am not joking. I genuinely believe that. Genuinely believe that. Manik, take care of yourself, sir. Um, and I took pride in destroying people's religion. I took pride in it. If I spent an evening with someone and after that evening that person told me, I don't know if I'm so convinced about God anymore, I felt good about that. That to me was a victory. I felt good. I felt, wow, yes, I'm stopping this. I'm stopping this blight of Christian thought. Because I thought Christians were stupid. I genuinely thought it. Like, guys, when I tell you I was evil, I'm not exaggerating that. I was not a good person. I'm not a good person now, except for the grace of God. The only thing that makes me good is the fact that God had grace. And in all of that, in the most vile and wicked stuff that I was involved in, now the one thing that I can give God thanks for, and this really is the only thing I can give God thanks for of my previous life, is that He never allowed me to break the law. My porn addiction never went to illegal stuff, purely by His grace. Right? I remember a while ago, I think I told you guys about this. I was watching the interview that Jeffrey Epstein had with Alex Jones. And Jeffrey Epstein is talking, and eventually I sort of zone out. I'm not even listening to what he's saying because obviously he's just lying about a lot of stuff. But my mind thinks immediately, this is a monster. Like this is a truly wicked and evil person here. Um, and then this thought pops into my head that goes, were you any better? Now, to be very clear, I never watched things with children in them or anything like that. I never had any interest in that. My specific area of interests were trans porn and that crap, right? So that was where my sin took me. And this is in news. I have a video on my channel admitting to my specific pornography. So if you thought this was a bombshell, all you have to do is go look at some of my first videos where I admit to all of that. I never went that way, but the thought came into my mind, are you any better than this guy? And I thought, okay, if I was a billionaire with absolute freedom to do whatever I want, if I can dream it, I can have it. Would I not have done the same? Maybe not with that specific, because the devil tests every single one of his children to give them exactly the thing that they're weak about. But I would probably have done similar things. Just as wicked, just as evil. By the grace of God, I wasn't a billionaire. And so I didn't have the freedom to follow every single evil, wicked thought that I had. And now looking back at my life, I can actually see where God stepped in and said, let's not do that. Times where I wanted to make my porn addiction a reality, where I can see God's hand going, maybe we're not going to let you do that. Right? Or times where I wanted to do certain things and I would see God's hand going, that's enough. This is going to destroy you. I'll let you live in this sin that you've created for yourself, but I am going to stop you before you go too far. So I thank God every single day for putting up the guardrails where he did. Because right now, all I have to confess is that I watched porn. At least don't have to confess that I engaged in certain actions, which I think is a grace and a mercy. But the point of it is, I was in open rebellion against God. If I lived when Jesus was crucified, I guarantee you, I would have been one of the people crucifying him. I would have been one of the people screaming to crucify him. Because that's what I was in my previous life. And what does God do? This wicked man that I've just told you about, this is me. This is my confession. Everything I've just told you is probably not even everything that there is to tell. What does God do with this man 2 years and 2 months ago? After everything that I've done, he calls me son. He didn't have to. After everything that I've done, God could have destroyed me and he would have been justified in doing so. God could have sent me to hell and he would have been justified in doing so. If I died today and I stood in front of the throne of Jesus and Jesus said, to hell with you, I would say, thank you, Lord, for being just, because it is what I deserve. I know I deserve it. I don't deserve anything else. So when you look at turn the other cheek, be like Jesus. When the soldiers are beating Jesus, what does Jesus do? He doesn't fight back. He accepts it. Why? Because the plan isn't to overthrow the government. It's not to stop the soldier from beating him. It's to pay the ultimate price for our sins. And so as Christians, why do we turn the other cheek? A nice story about this is Paul. Paul gets locked up in Rome. And Paul says thank you to God for him being locked up. Why does Paul say thank you to God for being locked up? Because in prison, Paul is converting the centurions. You wouldn't be able, as a normal citizen, you wouldn't be able to get to the centurions. The centurions are sacred. They're sort of just under the Caesar. But he's locked up. So the centurions are the ones guarding him, and Paul is converting these centurions. As they're guarding him, they're becoming Christian, and these are the people closest to Caesar. When we turn the other cheek, it is in service to the kingdom of God. That's the reason for it. It's the primary reason for it. And sometimes, we are called to pick up the sword in service of the kingdom of God. But never in anger, never in hatred, never in self-righteousness, only ever in service to the kingdom of God. I feel like I'm a good person. Sometimes I've done some pretty crappy things too that I regret. Call me Amy, there is no such thing as a good person. None is good but God. If it were not for Jesus, all of us would be in deep trouble. God sent his son as a way out for us. Praise God. MFC, amen. Om die ander wang te draai wys dat die Christen beledigings en bespotting verduur omdat hy Christus volg. Ons is nie groter as ons meester nie, mag ons goeie dade deur die wêreld gesien word. Amen. Amen, pondering professor. Absolutely. Damn, you are speaking to the heart here. I walked exactly this road. Echo, I think there's more of us than we might imagine. I was searching for a live to watch. I scroll down and click on yours. Out of so many to choose from, God's always trying to pull me closer to Him. Colleen, I am very happy to have you here. Very happy to have you here. Clara, not married, not so much money as you would like to have. Don't know why trouble sometimes, but still have enough. Follow Jesus and get real truth from Jesus. Get enough real happiness from Jesus. Amen. Ultimately, if your case with God is right, that's a good place to be. It has been a while, and I thank God He has brought me back to you. Mr. Colossal, I am super happy to have you back. Super happy to have you back, sir. I have an agreement. Humans are evil. Our flesh is evil. We do have capacity for good, but the problem is our capacity for good is it's almost always outweighed in our capacity for evil. That's the big issue. We can't help ourselves. We just cannot help ourselves. We're always just one small tiny lapse in judgment away from doing something terrible. It is the wickedness of man at the end of the day. But all right, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be it for this stream. Thank you so much for entertaining me and for allowing me to give you guys history lessons and talk a little bit about international affairs. I know that my channel is mostly about national affairs, and I know most of you come here because you want to hear about South Africa. But I felt like I need to talk about this thing that's happening throughout the West and throughout the world. It felt needed to me. So I know it's not necessarily the most grand of streams, and I know many things happening in the country and many things that we can talk about, but I wanted to focus on this because I think this matters. Thank you very, very much to each and every one of you for being here, for listening, for showing love. And please understand that I love you guys just as much. So as always, ladies and gentlemen, and Echo, thank you so much for the 10 community subs. Ladies and gentlemen, can we get some hearts in chat for the 10 new members that is part of the channel? I truly appreciate that. I truly appreciate that our little republic is growing. And to every single one of you that support this channel by hitting like, by watching, by commenting, by giving money, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, be good to each other, be kind to each other, and I will see all of you in the next one. Peace.